Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Contour webinar, A Dozen Ways to Save Money on Your Records Program. First, some housekeeping items. Today's presentation will be recorded, and the recording will be shared with you via email tomorrow. At the end of today's presentation, we will show a list of upcoming complimentary webinars. If you or any of your colleagues are interested in joining future sessions, please visit us at contoural.com and select the Events tab to register. We will also share white papers, blog posts, and articles we've recently published. We invite you to complete our brief post-event survey, as we truly value and appreciate your feedback. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at info@contoural.com. And now, allow me to introduce today's speaker, Mark Diamond, Contoural President and CEO.
Thank you, Michael. And today we're going to talk about a topic which is actually receiving quite a bit of attention lately in organizations, which is what can we do to save money? And specifically, we're going to talk about what can we do to save money in our records management and information governance program. I think most of you know us. We're Contoural. We're the largest independent provider of records management, information governance, AI readiness, and privacy consulting services. We work with about 30% of the Fortune 500, many small, medium-sized enterprises, nonprofits, public sector organizations, just a little bit about everything. And many of the things I'm going to be talking about today, just about all of it, are what we've learned and experienced and seen working across, again, a wide variety of organizations out there. The idea of saving money is going to be very important for a lot of organizations. And I'm going to talk about today some things to do, as well as some things not to do. And by all means, ask questions throughout. I'm going to be looking at all these different areas. And, if you want to talk about, hey, this is what I'm hearing, the more interactive, the more you can send your questions, the more we can make this a virtual discussion, the better out there. And I think many of you have already heard this. Reminder, we're independent. We don't sell any products at Contoural. Matter of fact, we don't even take any referral fees for any products, nor on e-discovery services. We don't store any documents. So we are going to talk about some technologies today, but the discussion is really what we see works and doesn't work. It's not because we're being paid to say something or not say something or plug a given vendor. It's just our experience out there. All right, so I'm going to jump right into it. And the first area that I think is important in creating a records program is to choose the appropriate program maturity. If I look at, we have a lot of people listening on right now. Some of you are with large global organizations. Some of you have a very high litigation profile. Some of you have tens of thousands of employees. Some of you have significant amounts of personal, other types of sensitive information. And by the way, these are not necessarily the same. In some case, you can be very litigious, but small. You can, there's a variety of different things. And some of you, quite frankly, don't have a lot of these. And we really want to think about designing our records program to meet our basic maturity, to target the maturity consciously ahead of time, and pick the right level of maturity. I've talked about this in the past. We probably don't want to be, walking or using a bicycle level of maturity, because oftentimes we're not going to be fully compliant. On the other side of it, we don't really want to have a sports car maturity or part of a program. We've seen organizations, they have this really sophisticated data map. And we're not a big believer in a lot of data now, so I'll talk about that in a second, but they got this expensive software because, we have to do this. And it's completely out of whack with what they really need in terms of their target maturity. So let's make a decision. And oftentimes, a good Chevy or a golf cart will do just fine. And let's get one of those. Let's get something that's working. Get a Chevy. There's gas. I've talked about this, right? Gas in the tank. There's air in the tires. It works for us. Let's make the right decision in terms of our policies, our processes, our technology. Last month, we talked to Contoural about, picking the right level of AI maturity that you want. And the same thing applies to records management. We see a lot of organizations where, again, part of the programs, sometimes it's under, but a lot of times we'll see, they have this very sophisticated e-discovery program or tool or technology that they've implemented, which is great, except they have a very low litigation profile. I mean, do we really need this level? And so making a conscious decision ahead of time, we think, is incredibly important out there. So um, let's really make a conscious decision and make this decision ahead of time versus sort of stumbling into it. And again, we want to align the right tools and the right policies and processes, technology and the training, get those at the right level. The other thing I'll just add to this is that if you get too complex, if you're trying for, the fancy sports car or the Cadillac, it may not work. Not only be more expensive, it may not work for you, because if you've misfit the right maturity, if you're going for a Ferrari level of maturity, but you don't really need it, it actually not only is more expensive, it's much harder to implement it, and it doesn't work very well. So let's be smart about doing that. Next area I want to really hit on to is data maps. There are vendors out there that will say, hey, the first thing you need to do is you need to map all of your information types out there. Matter of fact, we've got this tool that will find out where all your different types of information and where it lives. And that's the first step, for example, to creating a records schedule or a records program. And I'm sorry, we're just going to disagree. Data mapping is useful for looking at your personal data inventory, but in that case, we want to look at not only where data lives, but the workflow, where personal information flows in and out in the organization. We find that useful. What we do recommend is creating an information types inventory. Let's look at all the different types of information we have. What type, all the types of documents and what types of information is that, and we're going to use that as input to creating our record schedule. Now, an information types inventory is more on the what. It doesn't try and map where everything lives. And so that's the difference between a data map and an information types inventory. And so information types inventory can be useful not only for records management, but for other use cases too. When we do content management, when we go through individual business units on the execution phase, that's when we do want to do some, what data you have, what information you have, what files do you have, and how do we move it to where we want to. But we're typically going to do that on a department basis, and we're going to do that as a one-time exercise. And likewise, obviously, if you're doing a legal hold, you need to do electronically stored information mapping. You need to figure out where your data lives and how do we move, so we can be relevant on that. Although I will make the argument that if we have a good governance program, we'll already, if stuff lives in the right repository, we can ask the repository versus trying to create a detailed data map. There's the low value stuff is trying to create an enterprise-wide unstructured data map. And the reason we're not crazy about doing that is, first of all, it's very, very hard to do. Second of all, once you create it, within weeks, it can be out of date. And we've seen, well, we did a data map, but it's no longer relevant. Or the vendors that say, well, we've got software that will be able to track where everything lives. No, I mean, you'll understand, yes, there's some files here, but none of the software, without a significant amount of effort, can actually understand what type of records are out there, what type of are in the shared drive, or what type of records are here, or what type of records there. And so therefore it's not useful. Again, let's know what you have. And certain types of information, like personal information, let's do more deep dive on there. But the idea that we need to create or buy an entire data mapping exercise, we're just not, we do this lots, we do it, we think fairly well, and we don't do data mapping. And so we don't find that is of value. Now, and again, there are going to be times where once we get stuff in the right repositories, we're going to be able to locate stuff, but that's different than what a lot of organizations are advocating, and quite frankly, spend a lot of money unnecessarily on the overall data mapping component of it. I'm looking to see, by the way, any questions out there? Feel free to ask the questions as we go through. All right, I'm gonna be a bit tactical today. The next area I want to take a look at is your records retention schedule. There's two ways you can create a records retention schedule. One is you can sort of get a vendor out there. There's a number of vendors, some buy the larger records retention paper storage companies that say, hey, we can automate your records retention schedule. You buy this product or you buy this as a service, and we'll create your schedule, and we'll always keep it up to date, and it will always be maintained. And they pursue that as a better way. And we're always looking for better, smarter ways of doing things. I'm not, I'm by no means old-fashioned in our approach to records management. The problem is we're not crazy about running a schedule. I mean, the good news about if you get one of these, Filers Keepers or Iron Mountain's got Policy Center, or you get Access has got their types of products out there. We're not crazy about them. Yes, you can create in the words of one vendor, you can create your schedule in minutes. Okay. The problem is a lot of times these can be very expensive. Your initial cost is expensive out there. But more important is these generic schedules that you get, and they tend to be generic, miss a lot of information, and therefore they're very difficult to automate. They sort of say what typical records you have, but they don't necessarily reflect what your records are. Very difficult to customize. Hey, let's include business value. Perhaps more important, you still got to validate them. It drives our team crazy. We're I don't know. Maybe we're a bit snooty, but we really want, when we have a legal and regulatory requirement, to make sure it's accurate. And we found a huge amount of inaccuracies in some of these products. They look fancy, they look like they're accurate. Boy, you can go click on the link, but if you actually start auditing it, as we've done, we found lots of errors. And so if you're using these and you want to be compliant, you're going to have to not only find out what the citation is, you're going to have to click on the citation, you're going to have to make sure that that citation is relevant to what you're doing. And then once you have it, you're paying an ongoing subscription. And so it's fast to begin with, but over time it can be much more expensive. What we think a better way to save money is to own your own schedule. You own the schedule, you can make your own changes. I'll start with the con. If you own your own schedule, it does take some more effort to develop, because quite frankly, you're building a higher quality schedule. And so some of these other, where you buy a product, at least initially they look cheaper, and some of them are just relatively cheap, but creating your own schedule can be more expensive, but much easier to automate, much easier to integrate with privacy discovery, which is one of the purposes we have that. Employees tend to like it more. They tend to be more bespoke, talk about what your records are. It's more meaningful, and over the long run, much less expensive out there. And so if running a schedule were easier, we'd be the first one to say, hey, let's go do this. But we think owning a schedule is a much better and easier way to be able to do that. So, and a way to save money. I talked to somebody recently. They were spending like $280,000 per year on rental, a large complex organization. And that's crazy. I'm sorry. That's just crazy. You can get your own out there to be able to do that. We have a question. Without legal, is there a recommended best practice for re-reviewing schedules over time, or valuable resources providing up-to-date retention changes? Thank you for Amanda for asking the question. So she's saying, I'm sorry, I blurred that through. Let me be a little more clear on that. Without internal legal, is there a recommended best practice for re-reviewing schedules over time, or valuable resources for providing up-to-date retention changes? I will talk about that second one in a few slides out there. But we believe that organizations should probably re-review their schedule every year or 18 months, in some cases every 2 years. When requirements change, typically they give a fair amount of grace time to be able to implement it. We've never had a client that who updated their schedule on that time frame every year, year and a half, or 2 years got in trouble because, there's new regulations that they missed. And more important, you want to do that as a discrete process out there. We have our clients that hire us to go and review their schedule. And typically, if you own your own schedule, you have somebody review it, it's just going to be a fraction of the price to update it and review it after a year and a half, or 2 years than it is to create the schedule. And so even that's going to be much cheaper than being able to do that. Let me know if, I answered your question, but I appreciate that question. And I alluded this earlier, the other thing that we want to do is we want to avoid double paying for the schedule. And this is just, we've talked about this in the past in some of our webinars. You buy these expensive products and they look good, but again, as you dig down on here, here's a very typical citation that a lot of companies that use these, off-the-shelf products, they have this, if you're a corporation, you have information relating to record of account books. Oh, I guess that's us. We have that. We're a corporation. You have to save it for a long time. But when you dig down, as we do, we found out that this citation is often misclassified. It's a real citation, but it doesn't apply to corporations plural. It applies to a corporation singular, specifically the Tennessee Valley Authority. Michael, I didn't tell you this. I was actually drove by the Tennessee Valley Authority a couple weekends ago. I was actually in Chattanooga, and I'm like, hey, I know a record requirement for them. Didn't quite knock on the door and tell them that. But if you're not the Tennessee Valley Authority, you don't have to worry about that. But we find lots of citations, whether real citations, but they just do not apply to you, and which drives over attention, that drives expenses. So if you or the consultant you hire really has to do the math, do the research to make sure it applies to you, because we find a lot of fancy looking schedule that have a lot of misapplied citations as part of that. The other thing, and this sort of goes to the update question that was asked a second ago, be careful. There's this idea that I'm going to have a third-party product, Access or Iron Mountain Policy Center or Filers Keepers, and boy, they're always updating the regulations, and therefore that's going to be even more compliant. I don't even have to bother about doing the refresh because the refresh happens in real time. And this scares me, and let me tell you why this scares me. This idea of having always updating records, legal and regulatory citations, if your schedule is updating every week or every month, and you're not also updating your training materials, your system configurations, resolving conflicts with privacy requirements, there's going to be a gap between what your schedule says from, this third-party vendor and what your practices are. And this gap is a huge compliance risk. You can be in litigation, and a litigator can say, okay, let me see your schedule. Let me see your training materials. Okay, why was it you decided not to follow your schedule? Oh, no, you don't understand. We just the schedule updates automatically, and then we do the training materials. No, you repeat the question. You said your schedule is your official policy. Why are you consciously not following it? What are you trying to hide? And now you're in explanation mode. And so we want to be compliant. We don't want to create risk. So when we do update our schedule, and again, we recommend updating it every year and a half, or 2 years, we concurrently, or as a discrete part of this process, we also want to then update the training materials and the SharePoint retention period times and other repositories and resolve the conflicts. And so, okay, we're doing the refresh and we're going to do it all at once, so we don't have a gap between what our policy says and what we're saying. And so we want to be very careful about making sure that we don't create more risk as part of the process out there. It's ironic, people, some companies go towards these out-of-the-box schedules, but thinking they'll be more compliant, and actually, unfortunately, it's a bit of the opposite out there. So what's the next thing we can do? And there's an overall theme here that's going to sound a little bit counterintuitive. You logged on this webinar and you're like, okay, I want to save money. That sounds great. How do we do that? So I'm going to argue something counterintuitive. If you get an out-of-the-box schedule, you can get a schedule much quicker, and in one case, much cheaper. Not all cases, much cheaper than if you were to create this modern schedule out there. Out-of-the-box schedule is 40 hours. If you're creating a modern schedule where you own your own schedule that I talked about, that can be, more time to actually be out there to develop it. However, the time that you spend executing your schedule is the vast lion's share of the amount of work and energy and expense in executing your program. If you've got this quickie schedule, you will end up spending a huge amount of time configuring it, dealing with exceptions, trying to get people to understand it, checking on it, remediating it. And if you put a little bit more energy and effort in creating a modern schedule, it's much easier, much more efficient to execute. And so, which again is the lion's share of what we're trying to do. We think that getting much more efficiency on the execution of it is a huge cost saving using technology. And I'll talk about some of these in a little bit. But again, it's a little counterintuitive because, we may spend a little bit more money creating a modern schedule than we will if we just get the out of the box one. But you will pay for it later. So we want to be careful on that. What's another way you can save money? And I'm looking, by the way, I'm going to take a brief. I think that's most of our, let me check to see if there's any question threads out there. Okay. Other questions, please ask those. How do we publish our schedule? Do you have Microsoft 365? And if you do, you can teach Microsoft how to actually publish your schedule. Here's an example. This is something that's accessed via browser. So anybody can who can and should have access to. It's good to have security on there. This is a records portal. Now, this looks like a third-party product. This is actually something called Power Apps, which is an inherent part of every Microsoft 365, all versions of M365, not just the more expensive ones. Access it via the web. You can customize it, and you can teach this to display. And this is just the first screen, but there's all these different screens that you could set up that you can search it, you can publish it, and then when you make a change to it, it's automatically updated. You don't have to worry about sending it to a PDF that somebody will look at, and if they don't look it up, they out-of-date PDF. It's just much easier. And likewise, you can customize this by language, by country, by department. And so if an employee needs to look up a records information, M365, which you already own, is actually a pretty darn good tool for doing it. And you can actually make this fancier or better than, again, a third-party tool. And so don't get too romanced by a fancy user interface, knowing that you could do the same thing with technology if you already own Microsoft 365 that you can use today. And so we see a lot of companies use M365 records portal. As a matter of fact, you can also teach Microsoft 365 to have a personal data inventory portal, which tracks where all your personal information is. Much easier, better way of being able to do that. So if you got Microsoft 365, this is a great way to be able to configure it and use it. Let's use what we already own. Another area out here, and I'm going to go on this, use what you already own. We're in discussion with a fairly large public sector organization, and they're saying, hey, what technology we need to own to buy out there? Well, and again, we're independent. I don't want to sound like I'm a shill. You probably own technology today that will do a pretty good job of managing your information, your content, your emails, and your files. Microsoft 365 can go an awful long way. And matter of fact, you can teach Microsoft 365 to automate your retention. How does this work? So I'm an employee, I get emails and files. Those that are records, and I'm a finance employee, we got tax records and journal records and AP records. These are the records that this employee accesses. There's more finance records and there's other folders out there in the finance department. But for this employee, this is all he touches. And when he gets one of these records, whether it's an email or a file, he drags and drops and puts it into one of these folders, and we put in the journal and ledger records. We can teach SharePoint and we can teach Teams and OneDrive to automatically apply retention and sensitivity labels. Matter of fact, all the employee has to do is put it there. They don't even need to look it up because the system knows the rules and the system automatically applies it. You can set up your records program with technology that you already own today. And so we do have companies that are looking to buy new technologies and other things like that. And by the way, not everything should go in Microsoft 365. We did a webinar on this 4 or 5 months ago. It should be recorded out there. M365 is not a good contract lifecycle management system. You could theoretically make it that way, and I know some that do, but yeah. Microsoft 365, Teams, or SharePoint is not really good. I'll say it's not good. I don't even qualify that. If you've got very large files, like engineering files, we got to figure out some other place to put it. So we're not saying this is the be-all, end-all, but we can significantly automate this with tools that we already own. And the other advantage to automating it, and this is a particular pain that organizations are feeling today, which is, let's turn on automatic deletion. Companies are saving a lot of stuff that they don't need to save, and they're struggling to pay because, even if we have it in cloud-based, that can get expensive. Let's turn on automated deletion. In this case, if I put an AP record on July 15th, 2026, and I store it using, SharePoint, for example, we also do the same with Teams. We have that rule in there, and there's different ways of doing this. We want to walk our way into it, but assuming we don't have legal hold on July 15th, 2033, or when this file's expiration period happens, the system will wake up and say, oh, looks like it's time to delete this. And so it will automatically go out and delete what we put in there. We're not bugging people. We're not doing that. We think that organizations can save anywhere, unstructured data, 40 to 65%, emails, 50 to 60%, and different strategies apply to paper, 40 to 70% of paper. And matter of fact, unstructured data, there's a lot of stuff out there that you can delete. And when you delete it, you're not paying for storage. I think we'll talk about paper in a minute, but there's this feeling that, oh, cloud storage is cheap. Talk to your CIO. She or he may have a different opinion, saying, no, it's not cheap. We're paying a lot of money. And if we can get rid of a lot of the stuff that we don't need, we don't have to keep, we don't want to keep, this is a huge way to save cost savings. And again, my theme here is, let's automatically delete it. Let's use the technology we have today. Now, if we are going to delete, I want to call out a blocker. And there's a certain irony to this. And I know there are a number of in-house counsel listening to this right now. I have met the enemy, and it is us, to quote a famous cartoon. Legal is often the one that feels the pain of over-retention, and lots of organizations over-retain, especially emails and files. But when we set up a defensible automated process for deleting stuff, sometimes legal goes, wow, I'm not sure we can do this. Why don't I approve this? Why don't we approve deletion? That's it. And what happens is you just switch the bottleneck from employees finding stuff to delete to the quote unquote official approver to say this is okay to delete. And before you know it, somebody in legal's full-time job is going through 20,000 or 25,000 different files every month to say, is this okay to delete? Because you don't trust your process. Trust your process. We gotta trust our process. And again, we're going to walk into it. We're going to audit. We're going to test it. We're not going to be, just turn it on and say it works. But we think this is the way to go. And so we actually, in reality, are very successful in deleting lots of stuff out there. So let's be smart about it. Let's trust it. And we'll talk about this. You don't need to be perfect on this. These are inherently imperfect process, but you can still be defensible, even in litigation, with an imperfect process, as long as we test and we audit that. All right, another area to save money on this. Let's really think about what are some common work streams we do. So let's suppose we live in records management. What do we do in the world of records management? We identify records and we classify them as such. We protect them. We make them accessible. And then at the right time, we delete them. Suppose you're part of the privacy team. What do? Well, we don't identify records, but we identify personal information and we classify it as such. We protect it from breaches, if somebody has a subject access request, we make it accessible, and at the right time, we delete it. Now, there's different drivers for this, legal and regulatory record keeping requirements versus privacy data minimization rules. But the point is, between the two of them, there's many different common work streams. There's sort of two different levels we can do this. First of all, let's all get together and let's have one work stream. Let's not, and we've seen this, we see organizations that have separate privacy processes versus separate records management processes. You're just wasting money. Why not have one process that addresses both? The same thing happens in e-discovery. We talked about putting stuff in the right repositories and making it searchable. We also have things for information security. A good records management program can drive much better information security practices, and vice versa, because we get better data classification applying the data classification. And so we reduce the risk of breaches. We can, matter of fact, do the same training programs together. This is oftentimes an organizational issue, but if we can find common work streams among different stakeholders and work together on it, we'll save money. It's easier. And in some cases, I'm going to go one step beyond that, and this may be scary for some. We ever want to think about combining these? Hey, let's combine our privacy program and our records management program into a single program. One group will work together. Now the records people are going to freak out a little bit. Gosh, we got to work with the privacy people, and the privacy people are going to go, "Ooh, we're going to be with the records people." But having worked with lots of companies that did this, you talk to them 4 months later and they go, this is actually working pretty well because we actually have more resources and more attention. So look at your organization, and there's oftentimes a lot of ways we can save money by merging not only privacy and records function, but other types of functions by working together. Let's broach those conversations the right way. All right, I'm going to keep on going through my list. I'm looking to see if there's any additional questions. Organizations, one of the ways we see misspent funds is the type of people that are hired into records programs. When you have a records program or a larger information governance program, there's sort of two things you need to do. The first one is to build out the program. Let's create the policies. Let's develop the processes. Let's adopt the technology. Let's develop training programs. Let's synchronize, privacy data minimization rules with record keeping. Let's integrate this with legal hold processes. Lots of stuff to do. And some of the stuff does need to be maintained. I don't want to say, hey, it's one and done. To do that, you oftentimes need a program builder. But if you hire a program builder, be a little bit careful on that, because program builders like building things. They like being on the cutting edge. However, it's very difficult to find a single candidate. I mean, I hire people smarter than me. We've got really good people. None of my people spans all the areas of information governance, despite having 25, 30 years worth of experience on average, because these are very different disciplines. And likewise, if you're hiring somebody, you're probably not going to have somebody that has all the requisite skills, but they still will be fairly expensive. And the other issue is sometimes these builders lack patience when faced with a slower pace or stuff stalls out, or when the building's done, they're like, what do I do now? I'm sort of bored. And so the tenure of these people tend to be fairly limited. The other option is to buy a maintainer, prefers to managing over building, lower salaries, easier to source candidates. A lot of times we find the internal people that are fantastic. We train them up and be able to do this. Now you still need to hire, self-serving comment, somebody like Contoral to build out your program, but that ends up being much cheaper because we can do it once, do it very efficiently. We can come back and update it. We do this all day long, not nearly as expensive, the ongoing part of it. And then the maintainer, is there to help, and they like doing it. And we've seen maintainers be with programs for many years. And in our opinion, don't worry. Oftentimes, if somebody's in the maintainer role, if somebody's got the right attitude, we can train them on records management or privacy or e-discovery or AI governance or all the different areas that we need to know. That we can train them on that. That's not hard, as long as they're got the right attitude, that's great to be able to do, because the knowledge requirement for a maintainer is much less than somebody who has to design the system to begin with. And not to say we're going to hide how we design the system from the maintainer, but we find a lot of companies stress about hiring more expensively when sometimes there's a better, cheaper way to be able to do this. All right, moving on. Appoint and spread responsibility with records coordinators. So call them records coordinators or information governance champions or stewards. We don't really care about the term, but one of the ways of doing this is you appoint somebody in each department as sort of a super user, and the super user gets extra training, and we're not, we have to present this the right way to the business units. It's not like we're saying, hey, we've got a job to do, but we want to take your resources to be able to do our job. And it's a little bit true. There's a better way to position it, which is we want somebody in your group to have capabilities of not only being a resource to help make changes, to help update stuff, to help, make sure you're managing your information the right way to make you more productive and collaborative, who lives in your group. And again, not a full-time job, maybe it's 5 hours a month or something like that. This is a great way, especially if you got larger complex organizations, of getting significant leverage. You don't have to hire 30. I know one company that, it had 5,000 employees and 35 records managers. It was crazy. I also know companies with 8,000 employees and 0 records managers, and that's probably not good either. But if you hire an information governance champion, or I'm sorry, not hire it, have these information governance champions that you point them within the business units, it's a good way to get leverage and quite frankly, to make the business units more productive. This is not, we're trying to take something away. We're just trying to work smarter. All right, moving on. Let's go out and attack offsite records. This is, if you're looking for the sweet spot on where we can get a good ROI, chances are you have a lot of paper records at, Iron Mountain or Access or other vendors like that. And these vendors have built to an art form of taking your records in, but once they're in, they make it very, very difficult and very expensive to get them out. And the problem is, not always, but a lot of times the records that are in there aren't tracked very well, and they're retained much longer than the retention period. And so and this, you may have seen it. It accumulates year after year after year. And before you look at your budget every year, you're spending a huge amount of area on this. And so, and there's been a lot of consolidation. Maybe you had a very nice local records vendor that got bought out by somebody, and now one of the big national companies is doing it, imposing their policies on that. We work with our clients, helping them be able to do that. This is a easy, huge cost saving out there. I mean, this goes straight to the bottom line. What do we want to do? We want to audit, analyze paper storage on a go-forward basis, and we really want to make sure that we don't create paper for creating its sake. We let employees know that we can store stuff electronically, and that's fully compliant. A lot of employees think, well, I need the official copy of this. It has to be paper. So let's stop creating paper. Let's consider an imaging and data placement process of lieu and paper storage. In other words, let's save stuff electronically and be comfortable with that and not feel the security blanket of having been able to do that. Audit your storage bills for accuracy and correctness. We find huge amounts of mistakes. Consolidate, renegotiate, and rebid, if needed, offsite contracts. We've seen organizations that over the years, maybe they're a global corporation and they got 15 different contracts with Iron Mountain, all saying different things. Or in some case, they go to the worst, high level cost of any one of them. Negotiate to eliminate hostage fees. Well, if you want to delete a box, you got to pay us. We had one client that was like $500. They didn't have a lot of boxes, but it wanted $500 to get rid of a box. You got to be kidding me. There's ways to eliminate that hostage fee to be able to do that. And then make sure for the stuff that you do save that we get back on, we classify stuff the right way, we get rid of it when we expired records, we don't use it anymore. Let's just follow our process. Organizations aren't really creating a lot of paper these days. They're certainly not sourcing much information for paper, but we still see paper as an inordinate expense as part of a records management program. And that's just found money in our view, and very doable. Got to be smart about it. We're going to get some pushback from the vendors, but we think this is great. How do you, I got a good question here. How do you handle the fact that there's relative lack of competition in the storage industry? Great question, Mark. We have to compete. There is lack of competition, but there still is competition, and there still are some local providers. And so we want you to get rid of hostage fees. Otherwise, we're going to put this out to bid. And a lot of times, we can do a whole webinar on this. A lot of times, the new vendor will pay the hostage fees from the old vendor. We want to make them work for it. If they think that they've got you locked in, they're going to sit back, dumb and happy out there. But if you can negotiate it smart, you can get rid of a lot of these fees. I got another question here. Sheila asks, how likely is it that an organization can eliminate hostage fees? Well, with the strategies I just talked about, in my experience, only really large clients, hundreds of thousands of storage boxes, have any leverage or eliminate those reduced fees. Actually, I'm going to know the opposite. We had one client that had 500,000 boxes. And I won't name the vendor, but huge hostage fees associated with that. So size is not always a way to be able to do that. I think you've got to let them know there's a viable alternative and follow up on that alternative. And we've seen both big and small companies. Now, it is a process. And if you've only got 500 boxes in storage, at what point do we want to put the effort into renegotiating and or rebidding this contract? I think there's potentially an argument there, but although I'll tell you this week we're working with a mid-sized nonprofit, and we're going out and looking at all the paper and being able to eliminate stuff. So even for them, we think there's a good ROI. But again, take a look at upfront what you're spending. Are they accurate? How much of that paper really should be there? How much can we eliminate? And then make your decision or strategy. And again, if anybody wants to talk offline about this, happy to go through our experiences on there. But don't feel like you have no options or you're trapped, because you're not. You're only there because you let them trap you to do that. All right. What's another way to save money out there? And this is a little bit squishy, but a good records management or information governance program that identifies and makes high value information available and something that employees can collaborate, and gets rid of the clutter, the expired records, can save, the average employee out there, we find a lot of productivity benefits out there. The average employee will spend 4 to 6 hours per week looking for information, searching, other things like that. And it's not 4 to 6 hours at once. It's often, 5 minutes here, 3 minutes there, but over a week that ends up to a lot. If you get a better, more organized way, and again, you can use tools you already own. You don't have to buy new tools. We talked about that. We have seen that drops to maybe 2 or 3 hours per week, about in half, saving on average 2 to 3 hours per week. Now, this is a little squishy. I have to, conversation you need to have to say, well, some employees are pretty well organized, and they don't spend 4 to 6 hours a week, and so the savings will be less. But on the other hand, there's some other employees that are fairly disorganized, or departments that are disorganized, and in some cases it's more. This is a hard thing to measure, but it is real. And maybe this is what drives you to this webinar. A lot of companies are saying, hey, we have to do more with less, or the same amount. We have to be more productive. We have to be more efficient. The shareholders are asking for this. Wall Street is doing this. It's part of running a business. Maybe you're part of a state and local, or provincial, and you're saying, hey, we just don't have the budget. We got to do our same responsibility with that. Or even, as I said, nonprofits are doing this too. There is a huge play for smarter records management and information governance, using a lot of what I already talked about here today to be able to do that, to help drive and make employees more efficient. And in some cases, we can measure it. In some cases, it's just a question of going to senior management saying, we've done this, saying, right now, or used to be, everything was on the file shares, and this was the process of finding the file shares. And sometimes you need to show senior executives how it is, because they've got administrative assistants and lots of other people that find stuff, and they've never experienced the 6 hours per week of finding stuff, because they have people that work for them that find stuff to be able to do that. But if you can show them the average employee and what the average employee goes through, and say, hey, we got a better approach right now. And by the way, we're not being, crazy hard, or this is not, you gotta drop and, do all these drop downs or put this metadata in. We made it really simple and really easy for employees. But once it's there, man, it's easier to search, and it's easier to find, and all these nice things. These are the arguments you want to make to senior management. And to say, I think there's a real productivity win on there. I've talked about this in the past. I had one client that, very smart, as many of our clients are, just about all of them, where she tried to stand up a records program, and everybody was sort of ho-hum about it. So she did another pass. And she didn't call it a records program. She called it an employee innovation program. Because, by the way, the company had said, hey, one of our big themes this year that the CEO had told the entire company is we need to be more innovative. So, hey, we can help on the record side. We're going to be more innovative. And when she announced it as the innovation program, everyone said, oh, this is good. And it was the same thing that she was proposing for the records program. It was just positioned differently. And as you're dealing with senior management, and we had a webinar on this recently too, we talked about how you message and position this. You want to make sure you're not, well, first of all, you want to say, listen, we're looking for ways to cut costs, and a whole bunch of ways that we're looking to cut costs. We're not above cost cutting. Maybe it's not running your schedule. Maybe it's hiring the coordinators. We have a bunch of those. The other thing we want to do is allow us to be more efficient, and doing this and being more efficient allow us to be smarter and help us drive our overall corporate mission. And then the other thing you may want to throw in there is AI governance. Hey, we can help, if we've got good quality, higher data quality, that will help AI governance. And that's another key area, because we believe as a company, if we use AI smartly, we can save money. And so be careful about getting trapped being positioned as just an expense. And a lot of companies think about information governance, records management, just as an expense. No, don't let somebody label on there. Be proactive on that, and you actually may get a lot more resonance on that, and ironically, you may get some initial funding to be able to do that. The other thing that I want to mention here is create a multi-year. If you're looking for cost savings, I got this I can do, I got this I can do, this I can do. Don't stage it necessarily as, oh, we got to do all at once. Say, hey, we're going to do these in tranches. We're going to do this section, and then I'm going to come back and report to you. And if I do well on this, I'm going to want you to fund the next set of tasks. And if I do well on this, I want you to send the next set of tasks. I'm happy to present the big vision to you, but I want to make it clear that I, as the information governance person in this organization, I'm speaking for you, will take ownership to making sure I prove out. That is a very powerful message for senior management. And again, you're switching the perception of records management as an expense area that we can cut to something that's actually easier and better for us to do. So lots of ideas, and I'm interested if there's other ideas posted on there. I'm going to see if there's something I haven't mentioned, and there are lots out there of what you've done to save money. Let's talk about it, but there are good ways to be able to do that. I'm looking to see if anybody's posted that. Briefly about Contoral, largest independent provider. We do records retention schedules. We do data placement strategies. We do assessments. We help behavior change management, organizational development. We're the builders. We can also help some maintaining and other things like that. So happy to talk to you. We've been doing a whole lot of these. We do a virtual in-house information governance seminar. Actually, I looked at, there's some people on this that actually participated in these. 60 minutes, and it's presented just to your company or your organization or your nonprofit, whatever type of entity you are. We do it for all of them, exclusively just you. And we talk about what are best practices, what works, what doesn't. Some of the things we've talked about here. And we really encourage to get not only the records and the legal folks together, but let's invite IT and InfoSec and data governance. And we've even done it for senior management, CFO, CEO, CISO, general counsel. It's presented in plain spoken layperson terms out there. And we can even offer CLE credit. Now, this is not a marketing presentation. We eschew doing any marketing discussion about control to this. Matter of fact, we couldn't offer CLE credit if it were pure marketing, or any marketing for that matter. And because it's an hour and it's virtual, it's easy to do. We're not going to charge you for it. And likewise, if we do this, you're not indebted to use our services or anything like that. Why would you do this? Well, because you're smart enough. If we say smart things and at some point you need our services, you'll make the connection. We don't have to, let's just be plain spoken about that. And if you never use this, that's fine. It's, we want to move the industry forward. So if you're interested in that, email us info@contourall.com. We do a fair amount of these. Happy to send you more description. Real easy to do. And if you sort of want to restart this, we can help do this very good way. But we've done this for a lot of organizations. Very popular program out there. We also do a peer exchange. If you're in a carrier or health plans or manufacturing or high tech or any of these industries out here, we like to get together senior stakeholders from all these industries, all of our clients, GCs, CPOs, InfoSec, whole variety of people. And we just get people in the same industry talking together. We don't present. It's just a birds of a feather of everybody in the same industry. What are you working on? What are you concerned about? What your experiences are? Because a lot of times you just want to talk to your peers. And so we facilitate that. If you're interested in this, mainly Contour clients, but we're happy to invite you if you're not a client as a guest to participate. We do this now. The next one's going to be in the fall, but we're happy to get together, and we encourage you to make contacts with people you talk to. So even afterwards, you've got, sort of an industry resource peer to be able to do that. All right. We've got a couple webinars coming up. We've got one, budgeting for information governance. So if you're looking at fiscal year 2027 financial planning, August is here. It's about that time of the year. What and how would you or should you budget for information governance? And we've got a brand new webinar coming up in September on how to define a record. We get this question all the time. How do you define a record? What's the difference between information and data? We're going to have a whole webinar that's going to sort of tackle that question. And because that's a very typical question. This is going to be a more focused webinar of that. As always, we have lots of white papers, articles, additional content. Go to the Contour website. And the astute listener will say, Mark, you just glossed over a lot of important topics. And yep, fortunately, I have people that work for me that are smarter than me and reach out to me. And chances are they have written a white paper, or we have an article or a blog or something that covers that exact topic. So go take a look, or if you want more information on something I did gloss over, reach out, just email us at info@contourall.com. Happy to be able to share with that. And then finally, I have a favor to ask. Do look at the post-webinar survey. My marketing folks will tell you I drive them crazy. I'm going, do we have the survey results? Do we have the survey results? No, Mark, they're not ready yet. I bug them about this. We really want to know, did you like the webinar? And likewise, did you not like the webinar? You might hurt our feelings, but we'll get over it. You just spent an hour with us. We want to make sure this is good content. Were we clear? What was not clear? Because that feedback helps us to get much better in these webinars. There's always room for improvement. Or there's something we haven't talked about that you really like to see. We've got some great ones. So do spend a minute filling out the survey, because we do look at your suggestions. And again, be positive and or negative. Just let us know, because all that just makes us better, be able to do that. All right, I'm looking to see if we have any other questions. I've got one question here that came up, which is, can you develop a formal ROI around records management? Ooh, that's almost a whole webinar itself. Some things yes, other things no. You can build an ROI around a webinar. I'm sorry, around a program. Here, I got webinar on the mind. You can build an ROI around a program for parts of it. You know, we talked about the offsite paper. We talked about the data storage reduction. Other things which are actually bigger ROI, like the employee productivity enhancement, you know, going from 6 hours to 3 hours a week is much tougher. We can avoid risks like big e-discovery or maybe, you know, issues around data breaches, which are very expensive if they happen. But those are may or may not, and those are harder to build an ROI. Usually when we build an ROI, we say, here's the 4 business cases for ROI. And some of them we're going to say, we can talk about them qualitative, but they're different quantitative, but we still present them. And they may discount it, but oftentimes senior management will appreciate it doing that way. And again, if anybody wants to talk offline about that, I'm happy to be able to do that. And I thought I saw somebody post a question. If you raised your hand, you want to post a question. Let me make sure I got all the questions here out there. And I think I'm about at the top of the hour anyway. All right. All right. Well, thank you again for spending time with us. If you're interested in the virtual seminar, send us an email. If you want to, and by the way, if you just want to chat for a second saying, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. Mark, can you spend 15 minutes on the phone with me? Of course I will. And I'm not going to charge you for, don't worry about it. I'm not going to charge you for it. I'm happy to be able to do that. We're not so busy or not so important. We're, you know, and even if you never use this, don't worry about it. But if you want to just talk about something, arrange a phone call. Happy to be able to do that. We like doing that. And if I don't know something, I can pull in somebody who does. So let us know. Okay. We have a question. Do you have a white paper on publishing retention schedules on M365? We have a webinar on that, but not a white paper, Joanne. And if you want us to send you a link for the recorded webinar, we can do that. I think that was your question, so be able to do that. All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much. Spend time in the survey, and good luck. I mean, there's money to be saved there. And part of what I'm saying is not only think about saving money, but position yourself as a driver of the business that helps the business be more efficient. Get away from being viewed just as a cost center, because you do that. You do make the business better and more efficient and more effective while saving costs. So be smart about that. Good luck and take care.